And finally tonight, Saints Peter and Paul are more than just pillars of Christianity. They are also the patron saints of Rome. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Alan Holdren tells us more.
Saints Peter and Paul are often shown together. Historically, pilgrims were welcomed to Rome by the two saints guarding the Sant'Angelo Bridge that leads to the Vatican. Art historian and Rome resident Elizabeth Lev tells us the story of the patron saints of Rome through the architecture of two papal basilicas, St. Paul's outside the walls and St. Peter's.
One of the most important points about these two basilicas is this twinship between Peter and Paul. They're always placed side by side, celebrated on the same day, because as the two apostles died here, they were born together in heaven. These new twin martyrs would be the ones that would refound the Christian city, and that is emphasized not only in the matching statues, but when the emperors rebuilt this church in the 5th century, they turned it. So no longer does it face like St. Peter's, like all the other churches. It doesn't face east, it faces west. It faces St. Peter's. So the two of them look at each other. The two brothers embrace across the city in the very urban planning of the two churches.
Typically, the celebration of the patron saints of Rome begins in the evening of June the 28th in the Vatican Basilica, when the statue of St. Peter is dressed as a pontiff. The feast is celebrated with Mass the next day in St. Peter's, and Vespers at St. Paul's outside the walls. The New Testament is our main source as to the life of these two great apostles. However, the Holy Scriptures don't say when or how either St. Peter or St. Paul died. To find out more about their martyrdom, we need to go inside the two churches bearing their names.
It started out as a place of sadness and mourning, and the body was placed into what we're assuming was a fairly simple, very simple hole in the ground, with a few years later perhaps some sort of memorial placed on top of it so that the first few pilgrims would be able to find the tomb of St. Paul. And then from there, with the moment of the legalization of Christianity, it blossomed into something greater and greater and greater.
Some skeptics don't believe that the remains of St. Paul are really present in the basilica, but on December the 6th, 2006, archaeologists confirmed the existence of a white marble sarcophagus beneath the altar and attributed it to St. Paul.
The amazing part of this story, and everything you see flowering behind it, is that this is the moment that the Romans finally made a mistake. It was the moment when it seemed that they had crushed out the Christians, they had rid themselves of this Christian presence, but actually inadvertently throwing that body in the hole in the ground, thinking they had taken out the trash, the Romans planted a seed. And we look at the flowering of that seed every time we look at the basilica, because the basilica is sitting directly on top of that tomb. If you start from the orb at the very top of that dome and drop a line down, it will drop through 2,000 years of history, through monuments and altars and makeshift walls, all the way down to the hole in the ground where the Romans first made the mistake of discarding that stone, which is Peter.
This very history of the Catholic Church, for which Saints Peter and Paul laid the foundations in the 1st century. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.